Okay, let's unpack this. The whole IVF journey, it's incredibly intense emotionally and physically. And right at the heart of it is the egg retrieval, the TVOR.
Right, transvaginal oocyte retrieval. It's a standard procedure done thousands of times, but let's be honest, it can be really painful, and managing that pain afterwards often relies heavily on medication.
Exactly. And historically, how that pain's been managed, well, it's been a bit varied, hasn't it?
That's putting it mildly,
Yeah.
which is kind of surprising for such a common, crucial step. So our mission today in this deep dive is to look at a really significant shift that's happening based on solid evidence.
We're talking about bringing in a non-opioid pain reliever, Ketorolac, right after the retrieval.
That's the one. A powerful NSAID. We need to look at why people were so worried about using drugs like this in fertility for so long.
Yeah, weighing those old fears about NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs against what the new clinical studies are actually telling us.
The big question is this move towards multimodal pain management a genuine step forward? Does it make things more comfortable for patients and help cut down on narcotic exposure?
Which is a huge issue everywhere, not just in fertility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for you listening in, this is a fascinating look at how good research, large clinical trials, can really overturn long-held beliefs in medicine.
It shows how we can find safer ways, based on data, to handle pain and maybe even help tackle wider problems like the opioid crisis.
Exactly. Better evidence-based care.
So to really get why this shift is a big deal, we need to understand what things looked like before. What was the standard approach, say, 5, 10 years ago? It sounds like it wasn't very standard at all.
It really wasn't.
Yeah.
Very fragmented, which, as you said, isn't great for consistent clinical practice. There was a Dutch survey back in 2017 that really laid this bare. It looked at protocols across different clinics.
And what did it find? Lots of heavy sedation.
Predominantly, yes. The most common methods involved opioids. About 42% of clinics used IV opioids. Another 31% used intramuscular opioids.
So injected narcotics.
Right. And then about 17% used non-sedative oral options. But if you look at older data, especially from the US and the UK, the sedation levels were, well, pretty high.
How high are we talking?
We're talking conscious sedation protocols, often mixing strong narcotics like fentanyl with benzodiazepines, drugs like Versed, or using propofol. Usage rates were reportedly sky high, maybe 95% in the US, 84% in the UK in some surveys.
Wow, 95%. That's near universal reliance on pretty heavy drugs just for an egg retrieval.
Yeah.
And that specific combination, opioids plus benzos, that comes with risks, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sources are clear on this. Combining those drug classes inherently increases the risk of respiratory depression, slowed breathing, even stopped breathing in worst-case scenarios.
Which is scary enough, but compounded if monitoring isn't top-notch.
And that's the truly striking part. Some clinics giving intramuscular opioids weren't apparently using the kind of rigorous vital signs monitoring you'd expect with those medications. So essentially, narcotics like fentanyl were the cornerstone of pain control during the procedure itself.
And that reliance, even if it's just for the procedure and maybe a short time after, that's the crux of the problem in the bigger picture, right? We're often talking about patients who are otherwise healthy.
Exactly. It's about iatrogenic opioid dependency caused by medical treatment. It's not just about preventing long-term addiction, though that's vital.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence shows that even short-term opioid use after surgery, like getting a prescription to take home, it slightly increases the risk of becoming a chronic user down the line.
So fertility treatment, which is already stressful and can involve multiple cycles,
shouldn't be adding to that risk, even inadvertently if there are equally good or maybe even better, safer alternatives. Narcotics should really be reserved for when they're absolutely necessary.
Okay, that perfectly sets up the alternative we're focusing on, Ketorolac. Tell us about this drug. Why is it strong enough to potentially replace opioids here? But also, why was the fertility world so hesitant about it for years?
Okay, so Ketorolac, brand name Toradol, is common. It's an NSAID, like ibuprofen or naproxen, but it's significantly more potent. It's specifically used for moderate to severe acute pain, the kind you get right after surgery.
So it's designed for this kind of situation.
Precisely. And here's the key thing. In almost every other type of surgery, orthopedics, abdominal surgery, you name it, Ketorolac is often a standard part of what's called multimodal pain management.
Meaning using different types of pain relief together.
Exactly. And when it's used alongside opioids in those settings, it's known to drastically reduce the total amount of opioid medication a patient actually needs to feel comfortable. sometimes by a really large amount.
So it does the heavy lifting on pain, blocking those signals, but without the serious risks of opioids like respiratory depression or addiction. But fertility specialists were wary. Why? What were the specific biological fears?
It really boiled down to how NSAIDs work. They inhibit enzymes called cyclooxygenases, or KEOX enzymes.
Right, KEOX-1 and KEOX-2.
And when you block those, you stop the body producing prostaglandins. Now, prostaglandins aren't classic hormones. They're more like local chemical messengers. Really powerful ones that control inflammation, healing, but also crucially play key roles in reproduction.
Ah, so interfering with prostaglandins felt risky for fertility.
Extremely risky. There were three main worries that kept NSAIDs like Ketorolac mostly off the table.
Let's break those down because understanding them shows why the new evidence is so important. First up, a fear about the eggs themselves.
Correct. Fear number one was ovulation inhibition. You see, the trigger shot, the HCG or Lupron trigger given before retrieval, sets off a specific prostaglandin cascade that helps the eggs finalize maturation.
Okay.
The worry was that giving an NSAI, even after the eggs were out, might somehow interfere with that process, maybe affecting future cycles or the timing of the current one.
Got it. And the second fear, that seems even more direct, impacting implantation.
Yep. Exactly. Fear number two, implantation risk. Prostaglandins are also vital for making the uterine lining, the endometrium, receptive to an embryo. They help prepare that landing spot.
So the concern was, give an NSAID around retrieval time, and you might accidentally harm the chances of a fresh embryo transfer actually working.
Precisely. But potentially jeopardizing the success of the entire IVF cycle. That was the perceived trade-off. Better pain control versus potentially lower pregnancy rates. A terrible choice to have to consider.
And the third fear was more about the procedure itself, the physical risks.
Yes. Fear number three, bleeding risk. Egg retrieval involves puncturing the vaginal wall and the ovary multiple times with a needle. It's known that Ketorolac can temporarily affect platelet function, making blood clot a bit slower.
So the worry was increased bleeding after the procedure.
A significant increase. The nightmare scenario being a major internal bleed, a hemoperitoneum requiring more surgery or hospitalization. So you had these three big concerns: ovulation, implantation, and bleeding.
And those three pillars of fear really kept potent NSAIDs out of the standard IVF pain toolkit for a long time. But now, new clinical evidence seems to have just knocked them down. Where's the strongest data coming from?
The game changer has been several large studies showing that giving Ketorolac after the retrieval is complete, typically just a single 30 milligram IV dose, is actually both safe and remarkably effective.
Let's talk effectiveness first. The impact on opioid use seems staggering. I saw one study, a retrospective one by Seidler and colleagues, looked at almost 2,600 patients.
Yes, that study really sent ripples through the field. It found that routinely giving Ketorolac cut the number of patients needing any extra narcotics after the procedure by more than half.
Over 50% reduction?
Yeah, get this. In the group that didn't get Ketorolac, about 25.5% still needed opioids in the recovery area. In the group that got Ketorolac, only 12.0%. A huge difference.
And that wasn't just a one-off finding from looking back at records, right? There was a proper randomized trial, too.
Correct. A more recent, randomized, blinded, placebo-controlled trial, the gold standard, with 400 patients, basically confirmed it. The group getting the enhanced protocol with Ketorolac needed significantly fewer IV narcotics afterward, 25% versus 41.5% in the standard group.
Okay, so fewer patients need opioids. But for those who do still need some, does Ketorolac help reduce the amount they need?
Yes, and significantly. That's maybe even more important for reducing overall exposure. The average amount of narcotics needed was almost cut in half.
How do they measure that consistently?
They use something called morphine milligram equivalents, or MME. It's a way to standardize the potency of different opioids.
Right.
So you can compare, say, IV fentanyl to oral Percocet accurately.
Right.
In that randomized trial, the average MME needed post-procedure dropped from 9.4 MME in the standard group down to just 5.2 MME in the Ketorolac group. That's a substantial decrease in the narcotic load per patient.
And crucially, patients felt better, right? Lower pain scores.
Significantly lower pain scores, yes, both right after the procedure in the recovery room and also when they went home. So it's a clear win for patient comfort. Better pain relief with much less narcotic exposure.
Okay, comfort win, opioid reduction win. But now we have to tackle those historical fears. Did this improved pain control come at the cost of fertility success? What about pregnancy rates?
This is the absolute key finding that really dismantled the old dogma. The studies were specifically designed to track reproductive outcomes very carefully, and the results were clear. Ketorolac use did not negatively impact clinical pregnancy rates, live birth rates, or implantation rates.
So that big worry, fear number 2 about messing with implantation, it just didn't pan out in the data, at least when Ketorolac was given after the eggs were collected.
Exactly. The large Seidler study, for instance, showed virtually identical clinical pregnancy rates for fresh embryo transfers. 32.6% in the group without Ketorolac versus 32.4% in the group with Ketorolac. No difference.
That's incredibly reassuring. The integrity of the cycle wasn't compromised. So what about the third fear, the surgical one, bleeding? Did giving a drug known to affect platelets lead to more complications?
Again, the data was reassuring. Multiple studies looked closely at this and found no increase in postoperative bleeding issues or complications in the patients who received Ketorolac.
No increase at all.
In fact, in that large Seidler cohort study, the rate of serious complications, things requiring hospitalization or another operation, was actually numerically lower in the Ketorolac group. It was rare in both, but 0.06% in the Ketorolac group versus 0.7% in the non-Ketorolac group.
Wow. So not only did it not increase risk, there's a hint it might even be associated with fewer serious issues. Maybe better pain control means less movement or strain post-op.
That's speculative, but possible. The main takeaway, though, is crystal clear. Ketorolac, given post-retrieval, provides excellent pain relief, demonstrably reduces the need for opioids, improves patient comfort, and does not compromise IVF success rates or increase surgical bleeding risk.
It really seems like a win-win-win. Better experience, safer medication profile, same outcomes.
Exactly. It supports the broader goal of reducing opioid exposure across medicine, making fertility treatments simultaneously safer and more comfortable.
So what's the bottom line for someone going through IVF today? What does this shift mean practically?
It means that using a multimodal approach, combining different types of pain relief, crucially including potent non-narcotics like Ketorolac, right after the procedure is a proven effective strategy. It shows there's a clear, evidence-based way to manage this specific type of acute surgical pain without defaulting to heavy opioid use.
It provides a path away from that reliance in fertility care.
Definitely. Though we should add a couple of quick caveats. Ketorolac is powerful, but it's not for everyone.
Right, there are contraindications.
Absolutely. Doctors need to screen patients carefully. People with significant kidney problems, active stomach ulcers, or a high risk of bleeding shouldn't get it.
And it's only for short-term use.
Yes, the FDA label is very strict. Total use, that's IV, IM, and oral combined, shouldn't exceed 5 days because risks increase after that. And of course, multimodal pain relief isn't just Ketorolac. It includes simple things too, like scheduling regular acetaminophen or using heating pads.
Okay, so it's a powerful tool used carefully within a broader strategy. But even with those limitations, the potential impact seems massive, reducing opioid exposure for potentially millions of procedures globally.
It really is significant.
Which brings us back to that initial point about variability. If we saw in that Dutch survey just how many different protocols are out there, and now we have strong evidence that a relatively simple, cheap intervention like a single dose of IV Ketorolac can cut narcotic use so dramatically without harming success rates. Well, it makes you wonder,
How quickly will practice catch up with the evidence?
yeah, how fast will international guidelines and individual clinics adopt this? Could this become the standard everywhere, standardizing safety and putting a real dent in opioid use in this setting? Something for you, the listener, to think about.
Indeed. We've seen the data challenge the dogma. The next step is seeing that data consistently translated into practice across the board.
A fascinating example of evidence-based change in medicine. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.